In this lecture, we'll talk about page layout. We'll talk about the normal flow, then float, then we'll go over a two-column layout, then we'll talk about navigation, then pseudo classes, positioning, and Css Sprites. So to start off with, I created a basic HTML page. I've linked in a style sheet right here, and I've also included a header section, a navigation section, the main content area, and a footer. And inside of the main content, I have two div tags, and I've named them box1 and box2. Notice I'm using an ID to name them, and I've also put some text inside of there, and I've also styled this up a little bit, so I've added a border, a margin padding, and some background colors. So this is how the page looks, and we have box1 and box2. Now if you notice, box2 is below box1. They are not sharing a line. That's because div tags are a block element, and block elements will require the full width of the page, and they won't share a line with something else. So they won't share a line with these link tags. Most of the tags on this page are block elements. There are a few tags that you know that are not block elements or are inline, and those are anchor tags. So if I were to put an anchor tag around this, right here, so I have an anchor tag around the first links, and that makes this a link, but this tag shares a line with the other tags. So that's an inline tag right there. Now with normal flow, when we have block elements, the next block element will appear on the line below. Or we can also do this and put one block element inside of another one. And now remember, every tag creates a box on the page or a rectangle. And once we do that, then the box appears inside of this other box right here. Now if you notice, it's indented a little bit more. That's because it has a margin on it that pushes it away from the edge a little bit more, and this space right here is the padding right there. So that's just a little review from the previous lecture. Now that we've learned about normal flow, we can do some stuff that overrides the normal flow and moves these boxes to different positions on the web page. To do that, I've downloaded this picture of a wave. I'm going to put this wave and other elements on the page so that we can move them around. So I'm going to snap my fingers and do that. Alright, so I've added this paragraph of text. I took out box 2. Box 1 is still here, but I've added this paragraph of text, and I've also added the image onto there. So let's see what this looks like. And if you notice, the picture comes right here, and the text comes on the same line as the picture, at least the very bottom of the picture right here. This means that image tags are inline tags because they share a line with the text of something else. So if we wanted this image to be above, we can always take it out of the paragraph and move it above it right there. And now we see that the picture comes above, and because a paragraph tag is a block element, it won't share the same line as the picture. So as long as you have one of the tags that is a block element, they won't share the same line. But maybe what I want is the text to wrap around this picture right here so that we can have the text go around it like that. Well, to do that, we could go into our CSS style sheet, and I'm going to remove the styling from my box 2 because I removed that out of my page. And if you notice, I've put an ID on my image and I called it wave. Remember, we could put an ID on any tag we want. So we can style up the wave image. And to do that, I can float it to the right. And to see what effect that has, if you notice, the text came over here and the image went over here because I floated it to the right. Now if we do what I originally talked about, we'd want the image on the left and the text to go around it the other way. So now we have that like this, and the text comes over here. Now if you notice, the text touches the picture, so if the picture wants some space between it on this side right here, we can just add some margin to it, and that'll push the text away. And we'll do 0 margin on the top and bottom and 5 pixels of margin on the left and right. And so that moves the picture over a little bit right there. So that's the float property, but one downside to the float property is if my paragraph isn't quite so big, so I've taken out some text, is that this picture goes outside. We've kind of pulled this picture out and we moved it over to the left. But since we pulled it out of its surrounding box, or this div tag, the box closes before it's there. So the way to fix that is to add any tag that we want. We can use a div tag or a paragraph tag. We can even use a line break tag right here. I'm going to put a class right here, and I'm going to call it clear. And now in my CSS, I can add that class, and remember it's a class, so I'm going to put clear, and then we just clear and put both right there. And with that, that forces the box to go all the way around the picture. So the clear property brought the box down to here. If we look at our HTML, if you notice the clear property, or the element that we put the clear property on, is inside of the same box that surrounds the image that I'm floating. So whatever element that we happen to be floating, it's usually contained inside of a box. In this case, it's box 1. And since we're floating it, then we put a clear tag before we close that box. Now if I were to put this clear tag on the paragraph tag up above, right here, then it clears the float and then has the paragraph text come down below. And so that didn't accomplish what we want to accomplish. So we usually just put the clear on an element afterwards. And it doesn't have to be a long line break. It can also be a div tag. And that will have the same effect as before. So the next thing we want to do is make a 2-column layout. So I want the navigation links to go on the side and my header, main content, and footer to go on the other side, on the right side. To do that, the first thing I'm going to do is make this picture a little bit smaller so that we can fit everything on our page. And so this is with the CSS. Let's make it 150 pixels. And now that's smaller. Now the next thing I'm going to do is center the content on the page. This isn't necessary, but I'm just going to review from last lecture on how to center the content on the page. And to do that, if you remember, you wrap all of the content in a div tag. And I'm giving the div tag a name of wrapper. And I'm putting the ending div tag after the footer. So all of my content is now inside of the wrapper. So to style this up in the CSS, first of all, I'm going to add some background colors to my body. And I'm going to do a dark blue for my background color. And then in my wrapper, I'm going to set the margin to 0 and auto. So the top and bottom is set to 0 and the left and right is set to auto. I'm also going to have a width here of 600 pixels, just like that. And I'll also set a background color to a light blue color, and I have a hex code for that. And that should be a nice dark blue color, and we'll refresh the page. And now my width is a little bit too big to see the centering effect, so I'm going to change this width to 550 pixels instead. And so now we can see that we have our page centered. This is the wrapper right here, and then we have all of our content inside of that. So next, let's make our left and right columns. So to do that, going back to the HTML, let's move our navigation section up because we want it to be in the left column. So I'm going to create a div, give an ID of my left column. And inside of that, I'll put my navigation. And then all of the rest of my content will go in the right column. And I'll end this div tag right after the footer. And now I'm going to indent this stuff over so that we can see it. And now that this is all indented over, we have the right column and our left column. Now just like this, the only thing that changed that we should see is our navigation is now above our header, and it's in the left column. And now we can use CSS to bring the navigation over here to the left side and have this stuff go over here to the right side. So let's go back to our CSS file right here, and let's style up the left column, and let's give it a width of 105 pixels, or we'll just do 100 pixels. And let's also float it to the left because we want it on the left side. And so now we can see our links are 105 pixels or 100 pixels wide, and they're floated to the left. The problem is our page has gone over this way, or the rest of the content. So that's in the right column. So now we can change the right column to have a margin on the left side to be 105 pixels. So that should move it over past the width of the left column right there. I'm also going to add a background color to this. And I'll make it white. So there we go. We have our left column on this side and our right column on this side over here. Now another option to this two-column layout is we might want this title to span both columns up above. And to do that, we just go back to our HTML and take out the header from our right column. Since we want it above both columns, we'll just put it right here above both columns. Now next I'm going to work on these links right here so that they can look like normal navigation links. So really quickly I'm going to snap my fingers and turn all of these into links and also put them in a list. Alright, so I've changed my navigation section to contain an unordered list of links, and each element is a new link on the page. So when we refresh this, we see that we have our links down here. I also moved the header back into my right column as well. And we can now style up these links to look better for navigation. So going to our CSS, we'll go into our navigation section and select the unordered list, and we'll go list style type none. And by doing that, we'll get rid of the markers right there. And then one more thing is we'll also add the padding to just be 10 pixels. And that moves them over there. Lists by default have a larger padding to move them out, and by taking that padding and reducing it down to 10 pixels, now we get our links like that. The last thing that I want to do is remove the underline underneath these links. So to do that, select our navigation inside of our unordered list, all links right there, and we'll do the text decoration, and we'll call that none. Like that. And that removes the underline underneath the link. Notice to be able to do that, I had to select the anchor tag itself. So selecting all navigation inside any unordered list inside of the navigation, and then any anchor tag inside of the unordered list. That got rid of all of the underlines right there. And maybe we might want to make the font weight a little bit bigger, so we'll make the font weight bold. And now we have nice links right there. So I'm going to show you one more way to do the navigation. This is a vertical navigation that goes up and down. What if we want horizontal navigation that goes across? Well, to do that, I have to get rid of my two-column layout that I've just done. So I'm going to snap my fingers and rearrange this page to get rid of the two-column layout. So So what I did is I took out my left and right columns, but I still have my wrapper. And now I've moved my header up above my navigation bar, and then I have my main content section and then my footer. So the page reverted back to what it was before I applied the two-column layout. And then with my CSS, I got rid of the left and right columns because I removed them out, so removed them out of the CSS. And I've also added a background color on the header so I could see that it's different. So next we have the nav and the UL style, and it says list style type none, so there's no bullet points, and this is how the page looks right here. And now let's make these links go horizontally across. Now remember the difference between a block and an inline. A block tag demands its own line, so a list element demands its own line. Well, if we don't want it on its own line, then we can add that some CSS and make it an inline tag instead of a block tag. So what I'll do is I'll add, for all my list element types, I can use the display property, and I can tell it to display inline instead of block. And now we see that we have all of those linked that way. So now that I have the links horizontally aligned, we can do some more styling. We can add some padding to the links. This puts a bigger box around it, and add a background color. And I'm adding this background color to it. It's a light blue background color. And now we have the light blue background color. And now we can talk about pseudo classes. And the pseudo classes have several things that we can do, and I could just cover a few of them in this lecture, so make sure you read the lecture notes about pseudo classes. But pseudo classes allow us to add properties and do special effects, like when we hover over these things we can have them change their appearance. So to do that, we just add a colon behind here, and there's several pseudo classes that we can use. The first one is link, and that refers to all links that I'm selecting, so that's all anchor links inside of the URL, inside of the nav link. And then we have visited, and these are links that the user has visited, so they've already visited, and usually links will change color if you click on a link and then you go back, the color is changed because you've already visited it. And then we can have the focus, meaning it has a keyboard focus, and if you press the tab button, you can tab through your links and focus different ones. And then we have hover, meaning the mouse is hovering over them. And finally we have active. And so if we're going to use these, we have to use them in the same order that I just went through in the video. So look in the lecture notes to make sure you have the right order for those. So I'm going to make the default color of my links to be white right here. And then have the visited color of my links to be a light gray with a little right there. And then finally, when they're hovering over the link, I can change the color to this color right here, and I'm going to change the background color to my light gray color, just like that. So once I do all of that, now we have this nice effect. So besides adding effects onto links, we can also use these pseudo classes on other tags besides anchored links. It can be used on a div tag, and we can have elements change color and move around on the screen and so on. So the next thing we'll talk about is positioning, and there's ways that we can move there's other ways that we can move elements around on the screen. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll add in another picture so that we can move it around on the screen. So I'm going to use the same wave picture right here. I'm just going to put one below the paragraph and I can't use the same ID, so I'll have to change that to, I'm going to call this a movable wave. And then I'll just go to my CSS and style this up. And the first thing I'll do is make the width 150 pixels to make the wave a little bit smaller. So now we have this wave down here, and if I want to move this around, there's a couple of things that I can do. First thing I can do is change the position right here, and there's several values of the position. By default we get static, so that's what everything is by default. But another thing I can do is I can do relative. And if I just do position relative, I shouldn't see any change on the screen. We reserve this space for the picture. Again, this could be done with divs or anchor tags or anything. I'm just happen to be doing it with a picture. But now I can move the picture up by going top and say -80 pixels. And when I see that, notice I moved the picture up. Now we still reserve this space down here. If you notice, this border is still going down. So we still reserve this space, but this is really good for slightly moving things into a different position, but still reserving this space for it. So that's the position relative. Another thing we can do is position absolute right here. And we still did the top, but this time we'll do 160 pixels from the top. Right there. And now the picture is 160 pixels from the top of my page. I can half that and maybe make it 80 pixels. And if you notice that I've moved the picture down here, but there's no longer reserving room for the picture here. So when I do a position absolute, I pull that picture out of my page, and then I can move it around with the top. You can also use bottom, left, and right. So we'll do 300 pixels this way, and that'll move the image over here. So that's absolute positioning. And so now we know static is by default. Relative leaves space for the picture, but we can move it around slightly. And then absolute pulls the picture out, and then these coordinates right here, the top and the left, are usually the top and the left of the browser where we can put them that way. And the final type of positioning is a fixed positioning, and that means that the picture will stay where it is even when we scroll. So to be able to do that, we have to have enough content to scroll. So I'm going to get enough content on this page so we can start scrolling around. So I'm going to snap my fingers and do that. And so now you can see that I can scroll my page just a little bit here. So, but we'll be able to see the effect of this. And now going back to my CSS, instead of, now I have position fixed right here. And if you notice, as I'm scrolling, the picture stays in the same spot and the text behind it scrolls around. So if I did absolute, as I scroll, the picture scrolls. But as I do fixed, then the picture moves up and down. Or it stays in the same spot and the text moves up and down behind it. So as I said before, we can apply this to more than just pictures. So what I could do is I could take this navigation out here and I could fix it to the top of my page right there. So I'm going to style up my navigation. And I'll change the position to absolute to start off with, and using the top we can go 0 pixels at the top, and using the left command we'll do 0 pixels as well. And I'm also going to add a background color. I'll just have it be white so we can see that. And now we have our navigation at the top. Now the problem is the stuff behind it didn't move down. So what I could do is add some padding body, and I'm going to add just on the top, maybe 100 pixels of padding on the top. And that moved it down, so now we can have our navigation link. Now if you notice when I scroll, the navigation scrolls off of the page. So what I can do is change this positioning to fixed right here. And now as I scroll, the navigation stays at the top. So that's one thing that you can do with navigation. I can also change the width of my navigation to be 100 or maybe 800 pixels, and that will cause the navigation to span across the page right there. So there are a lot more rules to fixed and absolute positioning that you probably want to look at in the lecture notes and the reading. But for now, we'll move on to CSS Sprites. And for that, I'm going to take this nav bar and put it back here and get rid of this picture. So I'm going to snap my fingers and do that. Alright, so I've put this nav bar, I've removed the styling that fixed it to the top of the page right here. And I also removed the width, and I also removed the padding on the body right here. And I've gotten back to this page. I also took out the paragraph so we were not going to scroll. So once I have my page like this, I can start doing CSS Sprites. So a lot of sites make use of a lot of little tiny images and icons that they put inside of their web page. But for every time you put an image onto your web page, that's another thing that the browser has to download. So if you put 50 little icons on your web page, that's 50 pictures that the browser would have to download to display the page, and the page might load a little bit slower. So a way to improve the performance is combine all 50 of those images into one image, which we call a sprite. So I have a sprite right here. It only has 3 images, but there could be a lot more if I wanted to. I have a house and 2 arrows, and I want to include each one of these 3 pictures on a different location on my web page. So I'm going to snap my fingers and insert these 3 images into my web page. So what I've done inside of my box 1, and I could have done this anywhere, I just decided to put it inside of my box 1, I added a new div called Sprite, and that's just to create a section for these. And I added 3 anchor link tags right here. And I've given each one an ID, the home, the previous, and the next. And then in my CSS, my home, each one of these 3 things, I've given them a width and a height. Now that width and the height matches up with my CSS sprite right here. So the width of this is 46 pixels this way, and a 44 pixel height, just like that. And then we have 46 width for here and for here as well. So I set up this picture to know the exact size of each one of these pictures. And by setting the width and the height to that, I also, in order to make this work, I needed the anchor tags to be a block instead of a inline tag. So I've turned them to block tags, but so they can share a line, I've turned them into inline block tags. So inline block means that we can add a width and a height and make them a box, but then inline means that they can share, be on the same line. So after I've done that, I've added a background image, the same background image for all of them, and I called it the image sprites.gif, and that's in the same directory. And on my web page, you see I have the 3 houses. Now I told you I wanted 3 different images, so I don't have the arrows, so let me snap my fingers and make the arrows show up instead of the houses. Okay, so now I have the 3 different images here, and let me show you how I did it. First of all, instead of using the background image tag, I'm just using the background tag. And then I have the URL, and this is just a shortcut because you can have the background position properties. So this is a shortcut where I can include it all in one line. And so for the home link, I don't move the position of the background at all. But on the previous link, I slide the background over a negative 47 pixels. So what that does is it moves the background image over 47 pixels. So when I pull this up, instead of it showing this background image, it slides this thing over and this previous arrow fills in. And then the same thing with the next is if I have to slide it over 91 pixels. Now the reason why I did this off camera is there's a lot of adjusting the numbers and fiddling with that. So with this image I had to just have the width be 43 pixels, so I cut off the sides so that the picture was a little bit smaller in the previous and next, and then I had to play with these numbers a little bit until I got the right image on the screen. Now there's more that we could do with sprites. If we wanted the image to switch or slightly change colors as we hovered over these, we can adjust our sprites to do that. And we'd want to do this with the sprite because when we hover over these, we don't want to load another image, because if we did, then it would take a while for the image to download and there would be a little bit of a delay instead of switching right away when I hover over that. So I've downloaded or created another sprite. And this sprite right here now has 6 images. If you notice, these images on the bottom are slightly darker than the images on the top. So when I hover over one of these pictures, I want them to switch out to a darker image right there. And so I'm going to snap my fingers and use this sprite that's called Sprites Hover in instead of just the sprite that only has the 3. Alright, so the only thing I've done is added or changed the name of the background image to include the 6 images instead of the 3 images. As you can see, the page is just the same. So what I can do is add the hover property. So whenever anybody hovers over this link, we'll change the background. We use the same image, but we'll make it shift 45 pixels up, meaning that the home that's below the other one will shift into place. And once we get that, we'll see that this home turns to the darker one every time we hover over it. And so I'll snap my fingers and do that to the other two. So as you can see, I've added this hover property and onto previous and next, and I've included the same scroll horizontally, so I'm moving it over so we could get the right image in there. But then when we hover over it, it will also scroll it up, moving the darker image in. So now we can see that on this page. And now all of these will change colors as we hover over them. So I used anchor tags for these things, so they should be clickable, but we can use span tags as well. So I've switched out the anchor tags with span tags, and you can see that my images still have the same property. They're just not links anymore, so I can't click on them to do something. So you can also do this with div tags or paragraph tags or even image tags or anything else that you want to. You can always add a hover property onto any tag you want. It doesn't have to be an anchor tag. And another question you might have is, how do we create these sprite images to begin with? And all you have to do is find a photo editor like pixlr.com or have one installed on your computer and edit the picture the way you want it to, and make sure that each icon that you have has a similar width and height, and you can make a nice grid of icons and include them in your site. And then you just have to know how many pixels you need to slide it over to be able to switch out the background to a different picture.